Justin Turner left the office early that day, walked through his front door at 3 in the afternoon, something he hadn't done in over a year. The house was quiet. Then he heard it. Laughter. A child's laughter coming from upstairs. His blood went cold. He stood there, frozen, listening. That sound wasn't possible. Not in this house. Not anymore. He started moving, following it down the hall, his heart pounding harder with every step. He reached his daughter's door, pushed it open, and everything inside him stopped. 18 months before that moment, Justin Turner had everything a man could want. A tech empire worth $4 billion, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a name that opened every door in Manhattan, the kind of success people chase their whole lives. But on a rainy Tuesday in March, all of it meant nothing. He was driving his family home from his daughter Lauren's 9th birthday dinner. His wife Emily sat beside him, looking at photos from the party, her face glowing with the kind of happiness only a mother knows. In the back seat, Lauren, still wearing her paper birthday crown, was humming a song she'd been singing all night, completely unaware that her childhood was about to end. 2 blocks from home, a drunk driver blew through a red light at 60 miles an hour. The impact killed Emily instantly. Lauren's spine shattered. The doctors told Justin his daughter would never walk again. And him? He climbed out of that wreckage without a scratch on his body. But the man who walked away from that crash wasn't the same man who'd been sitting in the driver's seat. He couldn't face his daughter, couldn't look at her without seeing the moment everything fell apart, without seeing Emily's face, without feeling the steering wheel under his hands, the same hands that couldn't save either of them. So Justin did what guilt does to a man when it becomes too much to carry. He ran. He started leaving the house before sunrise and coming home long after midnight. He filled his days with meetings, conference calls, deals, anything that kept him from walking into the rooms where his family used to laugh. Work became his hiding place, his prison. Lauren stopped talking, stopped eating. At 10 years old, she was already giving up. The light in her eyes went out. She sat in her wheelchair for hours, staring at nothing, like she was waiting for permission to stop existing. 4 caregivers walked out in 6 months. None of them could handle watching a child fade away in a house that felt like it was built on a grave. Justin's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had watched it all. 12 years she'd worked for that family, and now she was watching both father and daughter destroy themselves in slow motion. She couldn't take it anymore. So she made a phone call that would change everything. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I believe God brought you to this story for a reason, maybe to remind you that grace still finds us, even when we've been running. Let this reach the part of your heart that needs it most. What Justin saw when he opened that door didn't make sense at first. His caregiver, Faith, the woman Mrs. Chen had hired 3 weeks ago, was lying flat on her back on the floor, and above her, suspended in the air like she was weightless, was Lauren. His daughter, his paralyzed daughter. Faith's arms were locked straight, holding Lauren up by her waist. Lauren's arms were stretched out wide like wings, her face tilted toward the ceiling, her mouth open in pure, unfiltered laughter. The kind of laughter Justin hadn't heard since before the accident. The kind that used to fill the whole house. They were both barefoot. Their hands were covered in paint, bright blues and yellows smeared across their fingers, streaked on their arms. There were art supplies scattered across the floor, papers, brushes, a keyboard pushed against the wall, and in the corner, sitting empty, was Lauren's wheelchair. On the wall behind them hung the family photos Emily had put up years ago, pictures of birthdays, vacations, Lauren as a baby, Emily holding her, Justin holding both of them. All of it, every single piece of it, was watching this moment that Justin had no part of. He couldn't move. His hands went slowly to his head. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His mind was trying to catch up to what his eyes were seeing. Then Faith saw him. Her face went pale. She so carefully lowered Lauren back down to the floor and scrambled to her feet, wiping her hands on her jeans, her eyes wide. Lauren's laughter cut off like someone had flipped a switch. "Daddy?" Her voice was small, uncertain, like she wasn't sure if he was real or if she'd done something wrong. Justin stood there in the doorway, frozen, staring at his daughter's face, at the color in her cheeks, At the light in her eyes, light he thought had died 18 months ago. Faith stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Mr. Turner, I was just—" But Justin couldn't hear her, couldn't process the words. All he could see was the empty wheelchair, the paint on his daughter's hands, the joy on her face that he hadn't put there. He turned and walked out of the room without saying a word. Down the hall, into his office. He closed the door behind him and stood there, his back against it, his heart hammering in his chest. His daughter had been laughing. Actually laughing. And he hadn't been the one to make it happen. A stranger had done what he couldn't. A woman he paid $12 an hour had walked into his broken home and brought his daughter back to life. While he'd been hiding in boardrooms and conference calls, someone else had been sitting on the floor, getting paint on her hands, holding his little girl in the air like she wasn't broken, like she was still worth loving. Justin slid down to the floor, his head in his hands, and for the first time since the funeral, he let himself feel the weight of what he'd done. He'd abandoned her. He'd left his daughter alone in her grief because he couldn't face his own. And now a stranger had shown him exactly what he'd been too afraid to see. That Lauren wasn't the one who was broken. He was. Faith Walker was 28 years old and knew what loss felt like. She'd buried her husband 2 years earlier. Cancer took him fast 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. She was left with a 6-year-old daughter named Maya, 3 jobs, and a grief that could have swallowed her whole if she'd let it. But Faith didn't let it. She worked mornings at a nursing home in Queens, cleaned a dental office in the afternoons, picked up weekend shifts wherever she could find them. She slept maybe 5 hours a night and ran on coffee and prayers. But people who met her didn't see exhaustion. They saw something else. Something that didn't make sense given everything she'd been through. Light. Mrs. Chen saw it the first time they met for coffee. She'd been looking for help with Lauren for months, someone who wouldn't quit after a week, someone who could handle the heaviness of that house. And when her niece mentioned Faith, Mrs. Chen knew she had to try. "It's a live-in position," Mrs. Chen had said carefully. "Caring for a 10-year-old girl. She's been through a lot." Faith didn't ask questions. She needed the stability, needed to give Maya something better than the cramped studio apartment they were living in. And honestly, she needed to feel useful again. Needed to help someone the way she'd helped David through his last days when being present was the only thing that mattered. "When do I start?" Faith had asked. That was 3 weeks ago. The first few days, Faith kept her head down. She cleaned. She cooked meals that mostly went uneaten. She helped Lauren with the basics, getting dressed, moving from bed to wheelchair, the quiet, mechanical routines of care. Lauren barely looked at her, barely spoke, just stared past her, like Faith was another piece of furniture in a house full of things that didn't matter anymore. But on the 4th day, Faith heard it. Crying, soft and muffled, coming from Lauren's room. Not the kind of crying that wants to be heard, the kind that's given up on anyone listening. Faith stood outside the door for a full minute, her hand hovering over the knob. Then she knocked. "Hey, sweetie," she said gently. "Can I come in?" Silence. "I brought you something. Chocolate chip cookies from that bakery on 72nd. They're still warm." The door opened. Just a crack. Lauren stood there in her wheelchair, thin as a rail, dark circles under her eyes, hair uncombed. She looked like a child carrying weight no child should know. Faith didn't pity her. She just smiled and sat down on the floor, cross-legged, and opened the bag. "I used to bring these to my daughter when she had bad days," Faith said, taking a bite. "Something about warm cookies just makes the world feel a little less heavy, you know?" Lauren watched her, didn't say anything, but she didn't close the door either. "You don't have to talk," Faith said. "I'll just sit here for a bit, keep you company." So she did. And the next day, she came back, brought colored pencils, sat on the floor again and drew terrible flowers while Lauren watched from her chair. The day after that, she brought an old keyboard she'd found at a thrift store, used money from her grocery budget to buy it. "You ever play?" Faith asked. Lauren shook her head. "Me neither," Faith said, pressing a key. "But we could learn together." It was small, so small, but Lauren's eyes flicked to the keyboard, just for a second. And Faith saw it, the tiniest crack in the wall this little girl had built around herself. She didn't push, just kept showing up, kept sitting on that floor, kept being present. Because Faith knew something Justin had forgotten. Sometimes love isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself or demand to be noticed. Sometimes it's just showing up, day after day, even when no one's asking you to. It happened 2 weeks in. Faith was sitting on the floor of Lauren's room like she did every afternoon, sketching something that was supposed to be a tree but looked more like a cloud with a stick coming out of it. Lauren was in her chair by the window, quiet as always, staring out at the city below. Then she spoke. "Do you miss him?" Faith looked up. Lauren wasn't looking at her, just kept staring out that window. "Your husband," Lauren said softly. "Do you miss him?" Faith set down her pencil. "Every single day." Lauren nodded slowly. Her fingers gripped the armrest of her wheelchair. "I miss my mom." The words came out barely louder than a whisper. Faith didn't move, didn't rush to fill the silence, just let it sit there between them. "She used to play this game with me," Lauren continued, her voice cracking. "Before bed, she'd lay on the floor and lift me up in the air like I was flying, like an airplane. I'd put my arms out and she'd make the sound." Her voice broke completely. Faith's throat tightened. "I can't remember what her laugh sounded like anymore," Lauren whispered. I try so hard, but it's gone." A tear slid down her cheek, then another. "And my dad." She stopped, swallowed hard. "He can't even look at me. He leaves before I wake up, comes home when I'm asleep. It's like I remind him of everything he lost, like he wishes it was me instead of her." "Oh, baby," Faith said, moving closer. "That's not true." "Then why won't he stay?" Lauren's voice shattered. "Why won't he just stay?" Faith reached for her hand and held it. Tight. "Sometimes people run from the things that hurt the most," Faith said quietly. "Not because they don't love you, but because they don't know how to carry the pain and love you at the same time. Your dad's drowning, Lauren, and he doesn't know how to swim back to you yet." Lauren looked at her, tears streaming down her face. "I just want my family back." Faith pulled her close. Let her cry, let her break open, and when the tears finally slowed, Faith pulled back and looked her in the eyes. "That game your mum used to play," Faith said. "The airplane one. You want to try it?" Lauren's eyes widened. "I can't. I know," Faith said gently, "but your legs don't fly the airplane, sweetheart. Your heart does." She helped Lauren down to the floor, positioned herself beneath her. Carefully, so carefully, she lifted Lauren up, holding her steady. "Put your arms out," Faith whispered. Lauren hesitated, then slowly stretched her arms wide, and Faith lifted her higher. For the first time in 18 months, Lauren smiled. Then she laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and true. "I'm flying," she whispered. Faith's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, you are, baby. Yes, you are." It became their thing after that. Every single afternoon, Faith would finish her work, come to Lauren's room, and they'd play airplane. Sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for 20. And every single time, Lauren laughed, like she was remembering what joy felt like. Until the day Justin came home early and saw it. Justin didn't leave his office for hours. He sat in the dark, staring at nothing, replaying what he'd seen. His daughter's face, that light in her eyes, the sound of her laughter echoing through a house that had been silent for so long. And Faith, on the floor, holding Lauren like she mattered, like she was worth the effort. He couldn't shake it, couldn't make sense of why it bothered him so much. It should have been relief, shouldn't it? Someone was finally getting through to Lauren. Someone was helping her heal. But all Justin felt was anger. No, not anger. Something worse. Shame. Because he wasn't the one on that floor. He wasn't the one covered in paint, making his daughter laugh. He was the one who'd been running, hiding, convincing himself that staying away was easier than staying present. And now a stranger, a woman he barely knew, was doing what he should have been doing all along. Around 2 in the morning, Justin picked up his phone. He pulled up a contact he only used for corporate security. A private investigator he'd hired a few times over the years for background checks on potential business partners. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he typed out a message. "I need a full background on my daughter's caregiver, Faith Walker. Everything. Work history, financial records, personal life. I want to know who she is." He hit send before he could talk himself out of it. 10 days later, the report arrived. Justin opened it alone in his study, the house quiet around him. Mrs. Chen was asleep. Lauren was asleep. The city outside his window glowed with a million lives he wasn't part of. He started reading. Faith Elizabeth Walker, age 28, widow, husband David Walker, deceased 2 years prior, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, one dependent, Maya Walker, age 6. Justin kept reading. No criminal record, currently employed at 3 locations: Sunrise Nursing Home, Queens, Bright Smiles Dental, Manhattan, various freelance cleaning contracts. Average monthly income, $2,100. He turned the page. Bank records indicate recent purchases at Michael's Art Supplies, $47, Goodwill, $15, Morton Williams Bakery, $23, Chelsea Music Shop, $65. Dates correspond with employment at Turner Residence. Justin's chest tightened. Financial analysis suggests subject is reducing personal grocery expenditures to accommodate additional spending. Credit card shows increased debt over past 3 weeks. Assessment. Subject appears to be using personal funds for employer's child. The paper slipped from Justin's hands. She was spending her own money, money she didn't have, skipping meals so she could buy art supplies for a child who wasn't hers. For a daughter whose father had more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Justin covered his face with his hands. He'd investigated a saint, run a background check on a woman who was quietly sacrificing everything she had to help his daughter heal. While he'd been drowning in guilt and self-pity, Faith had been showing up every single day, giving from her own emptiness. The shame was unbearable. He thought about Lauren's face, the way she'd looked at him when he walked out of that room, like she'd done something wrong, like she was afraid he'd take away the one good thing she had left. And Faith, standing there covered in paint, terrified she was about to lose her job for the crime of loving his daughter. Justin sat there until the sun came up, the report spread out in front of him, understanding for the first time what he'd become. A man so broken by his own pain that he'd abandoned the one person who needed him most. And it had taken a widow making $12 an hour to show him what real love looked like. The next evening, Justin waited in the living room until Faith's shift was over. He heard her footsteps coming down the stairs, saw her grab her coat from the hook by the door. "Faith," he said quietly, "can we talk for a minute?" She turned. The color drained from her face. She nodded slowly, setting her bag down. They stood there in the dim light of the hallway. Justin didn't know how to start. Didn't know how to say what needed to be said without sounding like the kind of man who ruins good things. "I had you investigated," he said finally. Faith went completely still. "I know you've been using your own money," Justin continued, his voice low. "Money you don't have. For art supplies. For that keyboard. For Lauren." She didn't say anything. Just stood there, her hands clenched at her sides. "Why?" Justin asked. The word came out rougher than he meant it to. "Why would you do that?" Faith looked at him for a long moment. Then she took a breath. "Because she needed someone to see her," she said quietly. "Not the wheelchair, not the tragedy, just her, a little girl who lost her mother and was losing herself because nobody knew how to reach her anymore." Justin felt something crack inside his chest. "And you?" Faith's voice wavered, but she didn't look away. "With all due respect, Mr. Turner, you disappeared. You left her alone in that grief. And I know what that feels like. I know what it's like to lose someone and feel like you're drowning. But she's 10 years old. She didn't ask for any of this, and she needed her father." The words hit like a fist. Justin's throat closed. He tried to speak but couldn't, tried to breathe but the air wouldn't come. "I can't look at her," he finally said, his voice breaking. "Every time I try, I see the accident. I see my wife's face. I see my hands on the wheel I was holding when everything ended." He pressed his palms against his eyes. "I was driving," he whispered. "I couldn't save Emily. I couldn't protect Lauren. And I walked away without a scratch while they—" His voice shattered completely. "I should have died instead," he said. "Not Emily, me." Faith stepped closer. Her voice was soft but firm. "Lauren doesn't know that's why you can't look at her," she said. She thinks you're disgusted by her, that you blame her for the accident, that she's the reason you can't stand to be home anymore. Justin's head snapped up. What? She thinks she lost both parents that night, Faith said, her eyes wet. Her mother to death, her father to grief, and she's been waiting every single day for you to come back. Justin covered his face with his hands, and for the first time since Emily's funeral, he broke. He cried, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place he'd buried so deep he thought it was gone. Faith didn't touch him, didn't try to make it better, just let him feel it, all of it. When he finally looked up, his face wet, his voice raw, he said the only thing he could, I don't know how to fix this. Faith's expression softened. Let me help you, she said quietly. Let me help you find your way back to her. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Justin standing in doorways, watching Faith and Lauren paint together, watching them laugh, watching his daughter come alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. Faith never asked him to join, never pushed, just let him stand there, a ghost in his own home, until he was ready to step inside. Some days he could only manage a minute before the weight of it crushed him and he had to walk away. Other days he'd stay for 10, 15 minutes, just watching, learning his daughter all over again. The way she tilted her head when she was concentrating, the way she bit her bottom lip when she was trying not to smile, the way her eyes lit up when Faith said something that surprised her. All the small things he'd missed while he was running. Faith would glance at him sometimes, a small nod, encouragement without words. Then she'd turn back to Lauren like it was the most natural thing in the world that he was there. Slowly, Justin started sitting, in a chair across the room at first, then on the floor, a few feet away, never close enough to intrude, just close enough to be present. Lauren noticed. Of course, she noticed, but she didn't say anything, just kept painting, kept talking to Faith in that soft voice she'd found again, while her father sat in the corner of her room like he was learning how to exist in her world. Then one Saturday afternoon, Faith looked at him and smiled. There's plenty of room here, she said gently, holding out a paintbrush. Justin's heart stopped. Lauren froze, her own brush hovering over the paper. She looked at Faith, then at her father. Her eyes were wide, afraid to hope. Justin stared at the brush in Faith's hand. His chest felt like it was caving in. Every instinct told him to run, to make an excuse, to go back to his office where the pain couldn't reach him. But then he looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and he saw what he'd been too afraid to see for 18 months. She was still there, his little girl. Underneath all the grief and silence and pain, she was still there, waiting for him. Justin moved forward, slowly, like he was approaching something sacred. He knelt on the floor beside Lauren's wheelchair. Faith handed him the brush. Their eyes met for just a second. Hers were full of something he didn't deserve. Grace, maybe, or hope. He took it. His hand was shaking as he dipped the brush into the paint. Blue, sky blue. He pressed it to the paper and started to draw. A car, a street, rain. Lauren watched. She knew what he was painting. He could see it in her face. It was my fault, Lauren, Justin said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not yours, never yours. The brush trembled in his hand. I was driving. I couldn't save Mom. I couldn't protect you, and I've been so afraid you'd hate me for it that I ran away. A tear hit the paper, smearing the blue. I'm so sorry, baby, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. Lauren dropped her brush. She reached for him, and Justin, for the first time in 18 months, held his daughter while they both cried. Faith quietly stood and stepped back, giving them the moment they'd needed since the night everything fell apart. In that small room, covered in paint and tears, something that had been shattered began slowly, carefully, to heal. The house started to sound different after that. Not all at once, not like flipping a switch, but slowly, the silence that had lived in those walls for 18 months began to crack. Justin stopped leaving before sunrise, started coming home by 4 in the afternoon. He'd walk into Lauren's room and sit on the floor without being asked, pick up a brush, and paint beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Some days they didn't talk much, just sat there together, creating crooked flowers and purple skies and houses that looked nothing like houses. Other days, Lauren would tell him about her day. about something Faith had said, about a dream she'd had. And Justin would listen, really listen, the way he used to, before the accident stole everything. Faith watched it happen from the edges of the room. She'd bring them water, suggest new colors, then quietly slip away to give them space. But she never left completely. Lauren wouldn't let her. "Stay," Lauren would say, reaching for Faith's hand. "Please." So Faith would sit with them, and the three of them would fill that room with something it hadn't known in a long time. Life. One evening, Justin looked up from the painting he was working on and watched Faith help Lauren wash paint off her hands. The way she was gentle with her, patient. The way she made Lauren laugh by pretending the paint wouldn't come off and they'd have to keep blue hands forever. "Thank you," Justin said quietly. Faith looked at him, surprised. "For not giving up on her," he continued. "For showing up when I couldn't." Faith shook her head. "You're showing up now. That's what matters." "I should have been here the whole time," Justin said, the guilt still heavy in his voice. "Maybe," Faith said softly, "but you're here now, and she needs you now. Not yesterday. Today." Lauren looked between them, then back at her father. "Dad," she said, her voice small, "will you come to my physical therapy tomorrow?" Justin's throat tightened. He'd never gone, not once. Told himself it was too painful to watch. But the truth was simpler than that. He'd been afraid. "Yes," he said, meeting her eyes. "I'll be there." Lauren smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. That night, after Faith had gone to her room and Lauren was asleep, Justin stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom and watched her breathe, the steady rise and fall of her chest, the peaceful look on her face. For 18 months, he'd convinced himself that staying away was protecting her from his pain, that she was better off without him hovering over her, reminding her of everything they'd lost. But he'd been wrong. She hadn't needed him to be perfect. She'd just needed him to stay. And he almost lost her because he couldn't see that. Justin made a promise to himself that night, to Emily, to the man he used to be. He would never run again. The next afternoon, Justin walked into the rehabilitation center with Lauren. He'd passed this building 100 times on his way to the office, never stopped, never even slowed down. But today, he pushed Lauren's wheelchair through the front doors and stayed. The physical therapist, a woman named Dr. Patel, who'd been working with Lauren since the accident, looked genuinely shocked to see him. "Mr. Turner," she said carefully, "it's good to see you." Justin nodded. He couldn't find words yet, just watched as they transferred Lauren to the mat and began the exercises. It was hard to watch, the way Lauren's legs didn't respond, the frustration on her face when her body wouldn't do what her mind was telling it to, the pain she tried to hide but couldn't completely. Justin wanted to look away. Every instinct told him to leave, to let the professionals handle it, to go back to his office where he didn't have to see his daughter struggle. But he didn't. He stayed, sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair and watched every single minute. And when Lauren looked over at him, checking to see if he was still there, he smiled at her. "You're doing great, sweetheart," he said. Her whole face lit up. After therapy, they stopped for ice cream on the way home, sat outside a small shop on Madison Avenue while the city rushed past them. Lauren got chocolate chip. Justin got nothing. Just watched his daughter eat and tell him about the songs Faith had been teaching her on the keyboard. "She says I'm getting really good," Lauren said, a bit of ice cream on her chin. "She says I have natural rhythm." "I'd love to hear you play," Justin said. Lauren's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" When they got home, Faith was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the apartment, something that hadn't happened in over a year. "You're cooking?" Justin asked. Faith turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "I hope that's okay. I thought maybe we could all eat together tonight." Justin looked at her. This woman who'd walked into his broken home and quietly stitched it back together with paint and patience and love he didn't know still existed. "That sounds perfect," he said. That night, the three of them sat at the dining room table, a table that hadn't been used since before the accident, and ate pasta, while Lauren told Faith about physical therapy and ice cream and how her dad had stayed the whole time. Faith caught Justin's eye across the table and smiled. And for the first time since he lost Emily, Justin felt something he thought was gone forever. Hope. Not the kind that erases the past or pretends the pain never happened, but the kind that whispers maybe, just maybe, broken things can learn to be whole again. Maybe he could be a father again. Maybe his daughter could find joy again. Maybe this stranger who became family could show them both that love doesn't end when life falls apart. It just learns to look different. 6 months later, Lauren painted a picture. She'd been working on it for weeks, keeping it hidden under her bed, only bringing it out when she thought no one was watching. But Justin noticed. Of course he noticed. He paid attention now, to the small things, to the way his daughter bit her lip when she was concentrating, to the light that had come back into her eyes, to the laughter that filled their home again. One Sunday afternoon, Lauren rolled her wheelchair into the living room where Justin and Faith were sitting, going over Lauren's progress reports from physical therapy. "I made something," she said quietly, holding a canvas in her lap. Justin set down the papers. "Can we see it?" Lauren nodded and turned the painting around. 3 figures stood under a bright sky, holding hands. A man in a dark suit, a woman in simple clothes, a girl in a wheelchair between them. All 3 were smiling, and behind them, painted in soft light, 2 more figures, barely visible but unmistakably there. A woman with kind eyes, a man with a gentle smile. Emily and David. The ones they'd lost, the ones who'd brought them together through their absence. Justin's throat closed. He couldn't speak. "I wanted to remember them," Lauren said softly, "but I also wanted to remember that we're still here, that we're okay now." Faith's hand went to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Justin knelt beside his daughter's wheelchair and pulled her close. "It's beautiful, baby," he whispered. "It's perfect." That evening, they hung the painting in the living room, right above the couch where they'd started having movie nights every Friday, where Maya, Faith's daughter, would curl up next to Lauren and share popcorn, where the laughter of children filled spaces that used to echo with silence. Justin stood back and looked at it, at the family they'd become, not the one he'd lost, but the one Grace had given him in its place. "You know what I think?" Faith said quietly, standing beside him. "What's that?" "I think God knew exactly what he was doing when he brought us to this house," she said. "I needed you as much as you needed me. Maya needed Lauren. Lauren needed all of us." Justin nodded slowly. "I spent 18 months convinced I was being punished, that I deserved to lose everything. And now?" Faith asked. "Now I think maybe I was being saved," he said. "I just couldn't see it yet." He thought about the afternoon he came home early and heard his daughter's laughter, the moment that broke him open, the moment he thought would destroy him. It hadn't destroyed him. It had brought him back to life. Because sometimes the things that shatter us are the things that save us. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves completely before we can find our way home. Justin looked at Faith, this woman who'd walked into his broken house with nothing but $12 an hour and a heart that refused to give up on people. Who'd shown his daughter what love looked like when he'd forgotten. Who'd taught him that showing up was worth more than any fortune he'd ever build. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Faith smiled. "You would have found your way back eventually." "Maybe," Justin said, "but I'm grateful I didn't have to find it alone." Lauren called from the other room, asking if they wanted to play the keyboard with her, and Justin Turner, one of Manhattan's most powerful men, a man who'd once thought success was measured in billions, walked toward his daughter's voice. Because he'd finally learned what Emily had always known, that the only wealth that matters is the kind you can hold in your arms, the kind that laughs with you on hard days, the kind that forgives you when you fail, the kind that stays. And in that moment, standing in his daughter's room, surrounded by paint and music and second chances, Justin Turner finally came home. Not to a penthouse, not to an empire, but to the only place that ever really mattered, to love.